So I would say, like, to the first part, then yes, like Elixir and Ruby are similar, probably only in syntax. Like everything else is completely different. Uh, so yeah, like comparing those two languages is maybe like hard because like the semantics are widely different, and like the virtual machines and the behaviors and also like use cases where you would use one or the other also differ. Uh, and the other part of the question was asking about like developers who write in Elixir but don't know, like write with Phoenix and don't know Elixir. And I think this is much less of a concern because a Phoenix application is an Elixir application. Like when you build your application with Rails, like Rails controls how your application is structured, the layout, and you use like the Rails CLI tools. But when you build your application with Phoenix, you have a regular Elixir application, and the layout is just like every other Elixir application, and use like tools that you would use with any other Elixir application.
So is Erlang community a separate community from Elixir community? Would you say that they are two different and they just use the same VM accidentally? Or
there's a lot of overlapping in the same developers. So you got core Erlang engineers on Elixir forum, for example, contributing answers and using Elixir evidently. But yeah, there's a certain level of separation between those two. There's a lot of Ruby people coming over to Elixir.
Like two?
two a day.
Yeah, however, going back to our original question, I actually wrote a blog post like a week ago on the subject, and explaining that this is actually different set of features that draw people into either language. So those people who basically advertise Elixir as a new, better Ruby, they probably don't know what they're talking about. So this is completely different environment, different runtime, made for different purposes.
So is it maybe that Erlang developers came up with Elixir to steal our jobs?
They didn't come up with Elixir. So Jose Valim came up with Elixir, and he was a Ruby developer. So sort of,
Yeah, but I think so. What was the story behind it? Like Jose arrived to this Erlang community somehow, get attracted with this, and I think that he should have had some popularity and get some attention from other Erlang programmers too, right? Was that the case, or?
So the story is that Jose was Rails core team member, and he was working on making Rails thread safe. And by the time he finished, that's from his accounts. He said he wanted to look at different approaches to concurrency because he felt like the Ruby approach was lacking. And in his research, he went through many languages, and one of them was Erlang. And like this sentence that stuck with me from his talk was that he loved a lot about Erlang, but he didn't like the things that he didn't found there. So he felt like there were a lot of things lacking in Erlang. And Elixir is his attempt to fill those gaps. For example, provide better error messages, better developer experience, better tooling.
So to replicate the Ruby experience that DHH sold us, that when he introduced us to like your blog engine in 5 minutes, he sold like a new developer experience, like so little code and so much effect, and that you don't need a very heavy IDE to work with the code. It was like DHH was the person who sold us Ruby. Like Ruby was already a few years old. It was a popular or getting popular language in Japan, and DHH brought it to daily light for the rest of the world. And so is Joseph trying to do the same thing, like with like trying to sell the new experience that we can have the benefits of Erlang VM, but more like less rough around the edges, like better experience, more pleasureful, because Ruby was built around the idea that the development should be good for developers, not for the machines.
So I don't want to speak on his behalf either. Like but I know that if you look at some of his presentations, he presents that there are 3 goals for ELIXIR. First is compatibility with Erlang, because you don't want to lose all of that is already built there, and all of the features, because they are really powerful, and you want to be able to use them. Second one is like better tooling and improving the developer experience, providing good developer experience. And I think this is something that originates from Ruby heavily.
So do you think the community is succeeding in that? Do you like the experience? Like, is it comparable to Ruby in your opinion? Like the pleasurefulness of working with Ruby?
Yes, I would say so. Like, it's obviously like an opinion, so it varies. But for me, I really like working with ELIXIR, and I enjoy working with it.
There's a certain level where you have to do slightly more legwork in ELIXIR than you would do in Ruby, and this is by design. So we're not being tempted with you're gonna write less code. You're most likely gonna end up writing a bit more code than in Ruby. However, going back to the discussion about Erlang and ELIXIR communities, I've noticed that there's a certain level of sentiment from Erlang community to ELIXIR community, and they have full right to do so. They're pointing out that they don't need fixing Erlang, that Erlang doesn't need fixing, and part of the reason why people don't really like Erlang, or maybe they don't know it, is just that it looks weird at first. Once you look at it, just the syntax looks weird. It's sort of inverted, conventions, naming conventions, stuff. But Erlang actually can produce very short, precise, readable code, arguably more readable than ELIXIR code. So just something to chip in from the observation. So we probably shouldn't be talking that we're fixing Erlang, because.
But don't you worry that like ELIXIR can finish like CoffeeScript, that Erlang will keep improving and changing in a way that JavaScript kept, and now CoffeeScript is a bit becoming irrelevant, or at least in my opinion? Would that be a good comparison or like incorrect?
I believe it's more of a comparison with Java, where you had JVM that ran Java, and now JVM runs number of languages. And the same is happening with Erlang virtual machine at the moment.
But it's also a bit different in a way that this is one of the goals of ELIXIR is that compatibility part. Like all the data types in ELIXIR and in Erlang are exactly the same.
But CoffeeScript had the same promise. It was the same object, just better syntax. And it kind of like, it was hyped, and then I used it myself, I like it. But then JavaScript with every iteration was much better. Maybe it was better because it felt the pressure of CoffeeScript and it started to evolve. And then, but that kind of, in my opinion, finished the career of Coffee. Like, do you think the same thing is going to happen with ELIXIR, or is it just gonna stay longer?
Right now, like looking at like things that like are planned for Erlang and what are things that are talked about in the Erlang community, I don't see anything that would make ELIXIR incompatible with it. So the things that I know that the OTP team is in Ericsson is working on right now, one of the things is making the Erlang distribution more scalable. So right now it works well for up to around 50 servers, but for anything more, it's it's failing. It wasn't designed to handle that. So they're working on that. And once they release it, you can immediately use it. So like the difference between Elixir and Erlang is really small. So I would even go as far to say it's the same language. It's exactly the same language with a different syntax and different standard library. So
not
the standard Elixir standard library is one of the biggest difference compared to Erlang. It's consistent. Erlang standard library was built for like 20 years, so it got messy in places. So that's one of the like key features Elixir provides over Erlang. Another one is macros and metaprogramming, which is basically lacking in Erlang. There are ways to do them, but even Erlangers don't like them. And the final part is probably protocols and data polymorphism, which is also not present in Erlang. Like those are things you could do in Erlang, but like they are not there. And like I think the Erlang community doesn't feel like they need them.
They're a very conservative bunch of people.
Yeah.
They've been using that, and it works for literally decades. So they're resilient to change. However, there are some certain features by osmosis moving from Elixir back to Erlang, and in some ways, Elixir is like a playground, sandbox for those ideas that eventually might end up in Erlang.
And for a moment, we touched a topic of JVM, and like one of the things that I was looking into when I was like, okay, actor model, let's have a look, let's give it a try, let's get a feeling how it works. What is this like to make your application in this paradigm? And you can have it in Ruby with Celluloid, you can have it in Erlang, or you can have it on JVM with Akka, on Java or on Scala. And for me, one of the things that I was wondering is like, when I decide on a new language that I want to learn after Ruby or whatever you come from, I don't feel like actually I'm first choosing the language itself, but the VM. So, for example, I'm much more comfortable with JVM because I got exposed to it on studies and I've played with it. I'm using applications that run on JVM. And like
it's got the same unfixed bugs since when you were on.
I think it evolves pretty nicely. And I was wondering, like, when would you go to what I consider a bit esoteric VM, like for Erlang, and when would you go to JVM and just use Akka on top of that, just a library that is working on top of JVM, which can run Java, which can run Clojure, Scala, and so on. So, because my goal, if I had to write an application that, in my opinion, would work better with actors, I would go with Akka and JVM. It feels like more natural way from a Ruby programmer to go into than Erlang. So I was wondering, why Erlang and not JVM and Akka, for example?
Why would we even need to go anywhere from Ruby?
That's a really good question, because my point of view is that I have some certain skills. It took me a lot of years to acquire them, and so I know how to use Ruby, I know how to do web development. And if I had to, for example, use WebSocket at scale, I wouldn't even want to implement it myself. I would just delegate it to third-party service. I would prefer to focus on business logic and delivering value. And if you're WhatsApp, then probably you need something like Erlang and handle million connections and do it cheaply. But the way I think about it is the business way. Just don't take such kind of projects. Just take projects where with every customer you earn money. So if you are Slack, for example, and people pay you $20 or $30 per user per month, scaling is not such a big factor, because you can easily cluster and you can, with every customer, you earn money. But with WhatsApp, with every customer, you have new connection and new cost, but not that much money. And in that application, I feel that Erlang is a pretty good choice. But if there's money involved, I don't feel that scaling or performance is a problem. Because
So you're saying that Slack makes money?
I would imagine, considering like how many users they have, believe.
Yeah, so it's a nice argument because most of the talk today happens is about scalable high throughput web apps. Is scaling relevant to everyone?
So I can say that in 10 years of running Arkansas, a Ruby shop, we had like one project that could benefit from something more scalable than Ruby. And maybe it's the choice that we make, that we focus on business applications. And I'm definitely biased with my love to Ruby. But like from the scalability point of view, just one project, I believe.
Well, we had several ones, and we actually did use different stacks than Ruby in many cases, like Google App Engine. There's one excellent developer from our team on the audience who did that, and it scaled like crazy.
So what are the use cases that you used it for and are happy with the results?
Well,
If you can say.
that was, I think, commenting widget, something like that, for big websites, major European outlets. So pretty much high traffic and spikes in traffic, etc. We never thought of using Ruby for that.
You also touched on Scala and Akka, and I haven't played a lot with it. But from the talks I saw on Akka, I know that one of the main concerns when you're building your application with Akka is to not block the thread, right, that you're running on, because you have just a pool of threads and you can block them, right? And it's problematic. And with Erlang VM, where the primitives for actor concurrency are built into the virtual machine, they are part of the virtual machine of the runtime, that's not the problem. If one of your processes blocks, another one will run. Like there's no way to block the virtual machine. So the virtual machine guarantees progress of your program. So that's one of the advantages of using a virtual machine like the Erlang VM that was designed for this kind of concurrency. Then, for example, JVM with this kind of concurrency bolted onto it in way of as a library.
So this, for example, enables building stuff like persistent WebSocket connections from the backend to the client, but also doing stuff like game servers. There's a lot of game servers being written in ELIXIR recently. So this is the area almost totally unexplored by Ruby and Ruby developers. So it's a different use case than web development.
As Ruby, we mostly do web development, so that's our focus.
And I think something relevant into this discussion would be a sentence by Joe Armstrong, one of the co-creators of Erlang. In one of his blog posts, I remember he wrote that in many languages, you write a web server that handles 1 million of connections. In Erlang and ELIXIR, you write 1 million. You have 1 million web servers, each handling 1 connection. So I feel like it's also a case of simplicity of your software, and I feel like for me, ELIXIR allows me to better understand the software I'm building. Now, there are many reasons why people come to ELIXIR. So there's like the performance that's like all over the place. And another things that like it's advertised all over the place, it's hot code loading. Like that's an awesome feature, but probably like I think only WhatsApp uses it from the big companies I know, because it's very hard to get it right. Like when you need it, it's awesome to have it, but it's really complex. So there are a lot of like things like marketing almost pitches for Erlang for ELIXIR. And this is why people come to ELIXIR, but this is not why people stay with ELIXIR. For me, I think the biggest thing that's made me stay with ELIXIR was the simplicity of the software I'm building. It's much simpler than it was in Ruby.
What makes it simpler, and why cannot be transferred to Ruby, or can it be?
It can. It fully can be, but it's mostly about patterns in your software.
But patterns are kind of general.
Some things can be transferred, some things can't. So you can't transfer the ease of doing concurrency, right? Like the parallel map is like 10 lines of
that's
ELIXIR
something
code.
that I never needed. Like parallel map. Like everyone is super hype over parallel map, and I'm like, whatever. Like maybe it's that kind of applications that I work for.
Like a use case, I use it for like very basic things. Is I wanted to. There's a tool that shows like contributors to a project from like GitHub repo, and I wanted to download avatars for every contributor. So like there was like I think like 1,000 files to download. Like doing it sequentially, like it's terrible. Because like you're mostly waiting on I/O, and like with ELIXIR I could like spawn a parallel map and download it like much faster.
But with Ruby you wouldn't wait as well. Exactly.
Yeah, so if you launch threads and do all of that things, you don't. But that's
I don't
not
always download 1,000 avatars, but when I do,
yeah, like that's an example use case. A simple one I have, and there's a lot of things like that. So for example, Ecto, when it does eager loading of your associations, it does it in parallel. That's a small thing, but it can be a huge gain if you're loading a lot of stuff.
So you're the man who brings the active record love to ELIXIR.
There's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between Ecto and Active Record.
So the Ecto team, they actually started building Ecto to be very, very similar to Active Record, but then we started shouting at them and saying, no, don't do that, just move out. And they listened, so they fixed it.
I would actually support, good luck with that. You can bring some Ruby Active Record developers to ELIXIR. That would be great.
But for me, the reason that I only basically hear about using ELIXIR and Erlang is performance. Like you said, that's one of the reasons people came but not stay. But if that's why people are coming, I wonder maybe that's my wrong perception, which is that there are not that many projects which needs enormous performance. But maybe I just underestimate how much money there is in gaming servers, in chat servers, and all of that kind of things which need good performance or scalability. Maybe there are much more projects like that than I imagine because of my bias that we are all writing business applications.
I think the scalability is also the ability to scale down and do stuff on a smaller scale than Ruby. So ELIXIR actually and Erlang, they scale down really well. A lot of stuff that you wouldn't do in Ruby, like home automation, embedded systems, you can perfectly well do with Erlang and ELIXIR. There are projects to do that. So it definitely opens different doors than just web development.
Can we talk about Ruby community for a moment? We have 200 people here. How many of you have tried ELIXIR? At least hello world. Okay. How many of you are convinced that this is a nice idea and you are attracted to do more ELIXIR? Okay, it's probably half. I don't know.
Yeah.
Looked like everybody did. You want some? It's supposed to be fights, so I'm trying.
But is it a good time to make a jump from Ruby to ELIXIR?
No.
What?
I mean, this is actually the part that I don't care. If someone moves, that is fine. Good luck with that. It's just something that I've been there when Rails appeared, and I was the Java developer who made the jump very quickly. But I think there's now a difference from my point of view. I see a difference between the Rails revolution and the potential ELIXIR revolution. And the difference is that Rails actually brought a lot of business arguments with itself. productivity was really like totally different than with existing Java solutions, PHP solutions, and so on. And with ELIXIR, I can see like certain technical niceties, like good things, like the scalability, you're winning here. But overall, like from the business perspective, I don't see like why would the business drive into this direction apart from recruitment hype?
So one thing I think is that like Ruby is famous for the developer happiness and developer productivity, and Ruby and Rails. But I feel like that's only considering the happiness of the developer that writes the codes for the first 3 months.
Yeah, that sums up the Rails community.
Yes. And with Phoenix, with the Phoenix team and with the Ecto team as well, we try to focus a lot on maintainability of the software, on the developer happiness, like a year or like 5 years. Like we don't know how it will look.
But there's nothing like in Rails that forbids from maintaining over years a good application, right? So
yes, but it makes it easy to do bad things.
So maybe we are just escaping from the bad people in the Ruby community.
Maybe I don't know.
There are, however, and maybe you haven't just met that cases, but we did actually, where our client went out of the business because the cost of serving single request in Ruby was higher than their competition who used something else. In that very case, that I believe that was an advertisement server, and their infrastructure put on. So the business is so competitive that this cost of serving content actually matters.
So it's now 30 minutes, and I think we can just end the scalability topic because we are coming back to the scalability arguments, right?
Well, this is not scalability. This is cost per view, basically, we're talking about, which is, you wanted a business argument. I'm giving you one. So.
Yeah, but I think like... Yeah.
Just come here. Just come here and sit.
By the way, if you have any like ELIXIR story to share or Ruby story to share which is relevant, just hit here.
Think from the other perspective, maybe without Rails, they wouldn't have opportunity to have a business at all. You know, they would take any other technology at the time, and they would spend twice the time, twice the money to get to the market. So yeah, maybe they in the end, maybe they went out of business because of Ruby, right? Maybe it wasn't Ruby related, but they wouldn't be there at the beginning without Ruby.
Yeah, definitely, in many cases that's the case.
So it's a success story for Ruby, right? They built a company, they went to the market, they got money, and finally, yeah, they went out of business, but they got money out of it, at least for some time. So yeah, a success.
Yeah, this is everything what's wrong with a startup community in a nutshell.
Or they got a VC, they got money out of it, and yeah. Great, awesome, great example, thank you.
Okay, but let's talk a bit about serious stuff. What are the bad parts of Erlang and ELIXIR?
Well, I can say that the bad part is community, at least in Krakow. No, really, I like
the bunch of nicest people in the world in ELIXIR community. Really,
definitely, I totally agree with this. But I go to a Krakow Erlang ELIXIR meetups from time to time, and I try not to sleep. It's like 6 of us or 8 of us, including 4 or 5 people from the company that is sponsoring the meetup. And for example, one of the last meetups was about authorization, how to do a device-like stuff, you know. And it was 1.5 hour long, and I was like, yeah, there's a device. So for me, I tried ELIXIR. I tried it. I wanted to try it with MongoDB at the time, and there was a single library with 5 stars 8 months ago, last commit, you know. And it doesn't feel right for business. I take it, I don't have a warranty that it will be up and running in 2 years. Maybe the business will have to switch the library, which means it will have a lot of additional cost. and the community is still too small to risk customers, clients' money with building software you can build with Rails. Of course, there are corner cases,
So
but I'm not.
do we have
talking about
anybody who could look for Java versus Ruby talks from 10 years ago? You would hear exactly the same arguments against Ruby 10 years ago.
I remember those
And-
talks, and there were like good, and I think valid numbers behind the productivity here. So what we criticize as like with Rails, it's easy to create a project within 3 months, and then you can fail with that. But at least you get there in 3 months, and that was something that the Java people, me included at the beginning, we were like, okay, we give up. This is like stronger argument. And that's what I'm looking for, like ELIXIR, and I'm trying to be friendly, but but I just don't see like the scalability. Yes, I'm buying the scalability argument. I'm convinced by that. If I ever had to write a chat or communication or game server, I will consider the ELIXIR definitely. But like for other cases, I just don't see this big reason. Like why the Ruby community. I respect all of you guys who raised the hand, who want to switch, but I just don't understand the motivation behind it. Like whether it's like business driven or whether you just want to play with new technologies.
Hype-driven learning, I would say. There's something new, you want to get to it, and it's nice.
I'll come back for a moment to the simplicity argument I made earlier. So today in the morning, I played a bit with like the default Rails stack and default Phoenix stack. So, and I checked like how much code do you bring to your application, like in the way of dependencies and things like that, because that matters. Like if a dependency has a bug, it's a bug in your application that you need to take care of because your customers cannot do something.
But our dependencies are used by thousands of people, and yours are used by 40 people.
Not
No, it's
really.
a
Like
it's a good
you
point.
use Cowboy. If you deploy to Heroku, you use Cowboy, the same web server that powers Phoenix. It powers like it powered. I don't think that they did some changes recently at Heroku, but for a long time.
It's customized Cowboy,
Yeah.
I think.
So the whole routing layer at Heroku is Cowboy. So yeah, I don't think like Heroku is going away anytime soon. So
No, it's like just another usage in this area where like performance scalability.
yeah, that's a different use case.
But you get, yeah, I agree with the dependencies, but sometimes you don't have dependencies and you don't do the project.
So
Money, in the end, most of the cases, like Robert said, it's about money, about customer money. And most of the time, they don't pay for us to play. They pay us to deliver business value. And apart the scalability, the business value most of the time is something that is working, and you can use it and you can get money out of it.
So how many times were you debugging something that didn't work and you dive deep into the framework? I know that when I was using Ruby, I did that many times. I was like chasing like calls in Rails and things like that.
But if that's your hobby, then that's okay. But
there was a bug in the application and it didn't
in the
work.
Rails itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I a couple times it turned out I was using something badly, because like the documentation wasn't good, like the error message wasn't good, and yeah, that was my fault, true, but I didn't know what wasn't working, and so Phoenix is about 5,000 lines of code, Ecto is about 10,000 lines of code, Rails is about 70,000 lines of code. And the default application, when you generate with Phoenix, all the dependencies, the Cowboy web server, the Ecto, the database driver, everything is 50,000 lines of code. And the default Rails application is 300,000 lines of code, including 40,000 lines of C, 10,000 lines of assembly, and things like that. And like the best code is no code. Like no code doesn't break.
Yeah, but no code does not bring backward compatibility as well. Rails is what, 10 years old, even more. I've been doing Rails for
13 years.
10 years. So eventually, I don't wish badly for you guys, but partially it will happen with Elixir and Ecto as well. You will have way more cases, way more corner cases you need to handle, things like that, and we will have the same talk. We'll just switch places in 10 years. Hopefully not, but probably it won't be 10k lines of code, but at least 5 times more, because new cases will emerge. You will have to have the
MongoDB support.
MongoDB, yeah, backward compatibility, things like that, things that are still in Rails. And Rails used to have this happy moment from time to time when they would drop part of backward compatibility, and it was really good. It's not there anymore. But I can say that if we would have a possibility to develop active record Rails again, it would look similar. It would be nice and tidy. And after a few years, we would have the same talk. So you're comparing a brand new piece of software developed without the overhead with a piece of software that was written and developed for, 15 years maybe, right? There was some time before the open source part with thousands of people. So I don't think this is a valid point to bring up.
At this moment, maybe it is a valid point, but it will change.
But when you're starting a new application, why you don't need all that backwards compatibility stuff.
That's true.
Yeah, but when you're using Rails, you bring it on, and you have it there, living in your application.
Yeah, if you start Sinatra up, you have 1 line or 5 lines.
Yeah.
So I wonder if one part of this Elixir attraction is that we are just getting bored in the Ruby community.
Yeah, they definitely look like that.
So if someone would want to create a chat app, why would he or she want to use Elixir instead of Node?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I never really understood why would anybody want to build a chat app in the first place. Like this is one of the hypes that I never understood. Like,
let's just dismiss
why?
Node.js together, right? We agree here, right?
Yeah. There's nothing better than to unify people than common hatred to something else.
Which is also part of the Elixir community, which I'm not sure about. When I read some blog posts, there is this. It's quite. You can feel it that there is some tendency to be against Ruby. Like Ruby is like something that they like. That was the same with Ruby and Java. Like we were like against Java. That was part of our DNA. And I'm worried. Like I see no reason. Like I see the marketing reason from Elixir point of view because it's clear to have an opponent. But this is Ruby, and this is weird. Everyone likes us usually.
I wouldn't say there's an opposition. Maybe there are some blog posts and some things out there that present it that way. But I would say definitely at least like from my perspective and from what I talk with like core team of Elixir and Phoenix and Ecto, like that's not a sentiment any of us share. Like we are not against Ruby. Like we often talk with like Ruby people.
Thank you.
We
appreciate it.
Like I talked a couple times with like Rails core committers, like discussing various use cases, various trade-offs that they made, and how we could handle things differently. What were the idea? What is their experience? What they learned from what they had, from what they changed. And what could we do in Ecto differently? So, and Hubert said it in the beginning that Ecto began really similar to Active Record, and there was a feedback from users, and I think the biggest difference was removing the things that make long-term maintenance difficult. So the prime example are callbacks. Like callbacks are problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with Ecto 2, we got rid of callbacks and brought some other abstractions to building. For example, like you want to do many things at once in a transaction. So we brought Ecto Multi that allows you to encode the transaction as value in your code, as a data structure, and that you can pass around, build, and then run, and the end as a transaction. And this is also not a new idea. This is basically the idea of a unit of work. But this integrating different ideas from different communities and making something of our own from it.
There's one feature of the community of ELIXIR community which is new for me as a Ruby developer, Rails developer, is the amount of discussion and the value of the discussion that it brings towards the evolution of the ecosystem, even with newcomers. So perfect example is the ELIXIR forum, which I highly recommend you guys subscribe to and register on. There's an often discussion involving Jose or Michał or some other core developers and somebody who's really new to the language, who's just coming over, and it often actually results in the changes either to the libraries or the language itself. Which was really hard, and I believe still is hard to do with Ruby, especially that the core Ruby developers, they still are in Japan, and it's difficult to communicate with them. I believe they now run most of the backtrackers, etc., in English on some ancient Redmine, which doesn't really promote discussion either. And here in ELIXIR community, this has a lot of influence on actually getting that info, what the user wants, what the user needs. At the same time, there's a lot of saying no, being assertive to the user requirements. Like they very carefully add features to, especially the Phoenix framework or Ecto. There's often answer is no, we're not gonna do that. You can do that yourself with little effort, but we're not gonna pollute the core framework with that stuff.
Well, okay. But what I found, I wouldn't say weird, I would say interesting with people that migrate from Ruby to ELIXIR, especially young people with less development experience, is that it's easier to be a rock star in ELIXIR than in Ruby. You won't develop a next Rails framework in Ruby, or at least it won't be as popular. Let's take Karavka, Hanami, many other, right? But since ELIXIR community is smaller, it's easier to be on top. And based on my experience, this is something that drives younger, in terms of experienced developers, to go into ELIXIR. They will have to put way less effort to be considered someone that is maybe not guru, but someone like Andrzej in the community. And I don't know whether or not it's good or bad, but it is kind of weird motivation, that it will be easier, so I will try to do it.
For the first 3 or 4 years in the Ruby community, there were only people, or mostly people, who were jumping from some other technology. So, and only after that, I realized that at some point we will have the first Ruby generation, like people who were born with Ruby.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Ruby child, and look what you did.
Yeah.
I'm not proud of you.
Okay, but hitting the ground. Is there a huge difference between tools available for ELIXIR and Ruby, IDEs, plugins, etc.?
Show me your Ruby mine.
I think there is something like that.
Yeah.
IntelliJ idea, but I don't use it. I use Vim, so.
The editor's tooling is not there yet. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and it can be better. And we hope to make it better this summer. So one of ELIXIR is participating this year in Google Summer of Code. One of the projects is building the language server protocol, and the one specified by Microsoft that works now with Visual Studio Code, like Eclipse. I think like every day there's like new editor supporting it and new language as well. And one of the projects is building the ELIXIR implementation for that. So this is basically in one shot allow you to have very good integration with many different editors, which is great. It's like right now you need to build a separate integration for every editor, and that's a bit painful. So we hope that betting on this protocol will allow us to improve it. But this is definitely a deficiency that I see. Yes.
So how do you do refactorings?
I just copy and paste. Like those are just functions, so I can copy paste them in a different file, and it just works.
So if you're
if you're extracting all the arguments,
you have a bigger method or function, sorry, and then you want to extract one part to a new function, like from the middle. You just
I do copy paste. Yeah, like.
Well, you don't have side effects, so it's fairly easy. Yeah, that's true.
I don't have a state in my class or in my object, so I don't have to worry about this. Like all the arguments are in the arguments list. There are no hidden arguments that I need to think about and take care of when I'm refactoring things. So like refactoring ELIXIR is very easy. You just take the code, place it somewhere else, and it's done. Like you refactored it.
That's actually true with most functional programming languages where you don't have the shared state somewhere, like global state in object. So something that my business partner recently pointed out when we were having a chat was that he was teaching a younger developer, and she said, "Move this. Why do we need this global variable?" Referring to object instance variable, and she called this object instance variable global variable, and it really got me thinking that this is equally bad as global variable. So
I
it
agree
makes
that
refactoring difficult.
overlaying on the state is a problem, which we see in object-oriented programmers and code. However, I think I kind of prefer to have this freedom that from time to time I actually want this instance variable to make things like simpler and maybe less verbose instead of passing it everywhere. So at least I have this freedom. I see in my evolution of my code that it's more and more functional because I choose to make it more functional. But at least on some of the places I can just I can rely on those evers.
So you have those options in ELIXIR too. Like
Okay.
the primary way to do like mutable state is process dictionary. So it's basically every process has like this hidden dictionary you can like basic key value store for the process, and you can put things there. And this is something we use in Ecto. When you do a transaction, we store like the connection that you're using for the transaction in the process dictionary, so that you don't need to pass it around explicitly everywhere. So this is available when you need it as well, but this is not the default. It is an exceptional situation to have mutable state, where in Ruby, I feel like in the regular development, in what you see in libraries, having mutable state is the default. Having immutable objects or objects that don't have a lot of state inside is something exceptional.
To be absolutely fair, this makes refactoring easier, but it also results in a larger amount of code.
Yeah.
So having that mutable state in objects reduces certain need to write certain code, but then you just easier to make a mistake.
So a typical thing that you can see in the Ruby code that is the constructor can accept several arguments with some dependencies, and I can store them in the evar. I'm not changing them; it's not a mutated state. It's just that I don't have to pass them to all the methods in this class, and it's easier to access them. So the code I feel is like less verbose because I have this option. I can still pass them. Sometimes I do make it very explicit, but I have this option to make it like more readable in my subjective opinion. I think it's also similar to the Python way of passing the self stuff like always, so that it feels like very functional, but in fact it makes code I believe, less readable as compared to Ruby, for example. And the same problem, I think, is with the functional programming of languages. The code is usually more verbose.
Yes.
It's very explicit, I agree. It's just...
Yes, the code is more verbose. Yeah. I won't argue with that. And the code is more verbose in many ways, like purposefully. For example, like in Phoenix, compared to Rails, where like in Rails you have like the default render, and you don't need to specify it. Like with Phoenix, you always need to specify, like call the render. Like render is just a function, so in order for the function to work, you need to call it, right? And it's as little as that and as much as that. And this makes refactoring easy because you see everything that's happening.
I agree. In Rails applications, when I'm refactoring them, I first put the render explicit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that our time is up. Who is still convinced to move to Elixir? Only a few of you,
Less
okay. Achievement unlocked. So let's take a 7 minutes break and let's meet at our last talk today. There are still 2 spots left for Lightning Talk session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.